She was 24 and homeless. No room, no family, no keepsake from her father, just a wet canvas satchel and $3 she had earned washing cups at a bus depot. And with that $3, she bought a forgotten hornsmith shop outside Lancaster in Conestoga Township, Pennsylvania, absent from county maps since 1891. The north wall bowed 6 inches toward the road. Rain entered through a split beside the chimney. Lancaster County condemned it on October 3, 2022, with demolition planned for the following spring. Inside the wooden axle of its polishing wheel, sealed behind a cedar pin for more than 30 years, waited money, a letter, and the last honest measure of her inheritance. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Elara Wren had been waiting her whole life without knowing it. She grew up in a narrow brick house on the eastern edge of York, where freight trains trembled the drinking glasses after midnight. Her mother died when Elara was 6, leaving a blue wool coat that smelled faintly of lavender. Thomas Wren never remarried for love. He remarried because grief had made the rooms too large, and a child still needed supper. Thomas repaired furniture by day and shaped horn at night. He believed broken things should be studied before they were discarded. On winter evenings, he warmed strips of cattle horn over steam, pressed them flat between iron plates, and let Elara hold the wooden handles while they cooled. The true keeper of the craft was Thomas's father, Abram Wren, who lived in a white farmhouse near Littitz with a barn leaning toward a field of rye. Every Saturday, Thomas drove Elara there before sunrise. Abram wore a leather apron darkened at the waist and kept one thumbnail permanently split from a fine-toothed saw. He taught her to simmer horn until it softened without turning chalky, to judge heat by the sweet, bitter smell rising from the pot, and to clamp a curved piece between warmed iron jaws before the fibers tightened again. At noon, they ate bread with apple butter on the back step. Afterward, she swept pumice dust while Abram pointed to what she had missed. Beauty is not in the material, but in the hands. He said it once while turning a cloudy scrap into a comb that shone like tortoiseshell. Elara understood only years later that he was speaking about people as much as horn. Abram died in January 2013, 3 days after a stroke left him unable to speak. His shop was cleared that week. The boiling pot went to auction, the tooth-cutting saws disappeared into cardboard boxes, and the old polishing wheel was sold with a lot of farm tools. Thomas kept only one narrow comb unfinished, wrapped in newspaper inside his desk. After Thomas died 9 years later, the house changed temperature. His second wife, Lenora, began closing doors softly and locking drawers that had never needed keys. She controlled the bank papers and even the hours Elara could sit in her father's workroom. She never raised her voice, making every refusal sound long decided. Within a week, Thomas's apron vanished, then the horn blanks, then the unfinished comb. On November 17, Lenora carried a rusted biscuit tin into the yard, set it beneath the maple tree, and touched a match to the paper inside. Elara recognized the curls of horn before the rain reached them. Her canvas satchel landed on the porch boards. Next one, brass buckle striking hard enough to leave a crescent in the wood. Lenora stood beneath the eave holding Thomas's ring in her closed fist. Elara's mother's sister, Ruth, waited behind the screen door, both hands folded at her waist, saying nothing. "You have no claim here. Leave before dark." Exactly 8 words. Elara lifted the satchel. Rain ran from her hair into her collar. Ruth's eyes dropped to the floor, and in that movement, the last door closed. For 6 weeks, Elara traveled east, because east was the direction of bus lines she could afford. She slept 2 nights in the Harrisburg station, beneath a timetable that clicked every hour, then 3 more behind the laundromat on Derry Street, where the drier vents breathed warm lint against the bricks. In Elizabethtown, a church custodian let her sleep in the choir room provided she left before morning prayers. She spent 62 cents on oatmeal, $1 on a bus to Mount Joy, and 75 cents on coffee. By the time she reached Lancaster, her $3 had become $1.12. She kept the dollar folded inside her shoe and used the coins only when the cold made pride impractical. On the 41st day, she entered the Lancaster Public Library to warm her hands and read until closing. A local newspaper lay open beside the radiator, its classified page wrinkled from damp gloves. Between notices for a broken hay rake and 12 laying hens was a county disposition listing printed in 6 narrow lines: Horn Workshop, Conestoga Township, structure and land, condemned, tax title transfer, minimum bid $3. Elara read it twice. Then she asked the librarian for a pencil, copied the parcel number onto the back of an overdue book notice, and unfolded the dollar from her shoe. The other $2 would have to be earned before the auction closed. She left the library before sunset and walked toward the diner on King Street, where dishes waited in a metal sink and steam clouded the windows. By midnight, her hands were raw, her back ached, and 3 $1 bills lay beneath a saucer beside the cook's register. At dawn, Elara turned south toward the county clerk's office with the parcel number in her pocket and nothing left to lose except the chance to arrive too late. The first bus left Lancaster before 7, carrying Elara south through cornfields glazed with November frost. She rode to Willow Street, then walked 9 miles with the canvas satchel cutting into her shoulder. A farmer let her sleep in a hay barn outside West Lampeter, beneath a roof that ticked with cooling nails. The temperature fell to 28 degrees. She tucked her feet inside the satchel and woke before dawn with chaff in her hair. Conestoga appeared as a gathering of useful places along the road: Miller's Feed and Grain Harnish Hardware, under a green awning, the Red Rose Cafe opening its blinds. Kreider's Shoe Repair, with 1 boot above the door, and Boyd's Market, where apples stood beside a sign for scrapple. Chimney smoke rested low over the roofs. No one seemed hurried. The county clerk's office occupied a limestone building beside a war memorial. Elara entered a room smelling of paper, radiator heat, and floor wax. Behind the counter sat a woman with silver hair pinned by 2 black combs. One lens of her spectacles was thicker than the other. Her brass nameplate read, M.R.S. Edith Klein, Deputy Clerk. Elara placed the parcel number and 3 $1 bills on the counter. Mrs. Klein looked at the money, then at Elara's wet shoes. You understand the structure is condemned? Yes, ma'am. You understand there is no electricity? Yes, ma'am. You understand the well has not been tested? Yes, ma'am. You understand demolition costs become yours if the order stands? Yes, ma'am. The clerk studied her as though waiting for youth to reveal itself as carelessness. Then she opened a cracked leather ledger and turned it sideways. Elara signed beside a blue ruler. Mrs. Klein pressed a brass county stamp into a red pad and brought it down with both hands. The sound was small but final. Take Route 324 south, she said. Turn after the old quarry road, then follow River Road until the pavement narrows. The parcel begins beyond 2 black walnuts. You will see what remains of the sign. She slid the deed forward, but stopped before releasing it. Wren, she said. You are related to Abram Wren. How was my grandfather? Mrs. Klein leaned back. The radiator clicked. Abram came here every April for nearly 20 years. Filed a craftsman's permit, paid in cash, always exact. He said the shop belonged to an older branch of the family, though the title became tangled after the last owner died. From a drawer, she removed a faded index card. Across the top, written in pencil, was Abram Thomas Wren. He tried to buy it once. The county would not sell while the estate claim remained open, by the time it expired, he had stopped coming. Elara touched the card. Beneath the name were dates fees and one unanswered request for access to the workroom. Her grandfather had stood at this counter. Did he ever get inside? Not through us. The clerk closed the drawer, but he knew what was there. She released the deed. Outside, the frost had softened. Elara followed Route 324 past a white church and an iron-fenced cemetery. At River Road, an elderly man in brown coveralls stacked split walnut beside a stone house. He raised 2 fingers. A red hound came to the ditch, sniffed Elara's satchel, and followed her half a mile before turning back at a whistle. 2 black walnut trees stood ahead, their branches dark against the pale sky. Beyond them, half screened by sumac, rested the hornsmith's shop. It was built of fieldstone and white pine, roughly 24 feet long and 16 wide. The roof sagged over the north corner and cedar shingles lay in the weeds. A brick chimney rose from the rear wall with its top course missing. Above the door hung a gray plank sign. Only 3 letters remained beneath the lichen ORN. Elara stood at the gate until the cold reached through her coat. The building was smaller than the house that had cast her out, yet it held a deeper silence. The key resisted twice before turning. When the door opened, a strip of plaster fell beside her boot. The front room smelled of wet wood mouse nests and cold stone. Her palm brushed a workbench filmed with gray dust. Above her, a loose shingle rasped against the roof. Light entered through one unbroken pane greened by age. It showed a rusted coal stove, a 3-legged stool, and hooks shaped by a blacksmith's hammer. Elara tasted soot when she breathed through her mouth. Beneath, the floor water moved with a muted sound. The back room held the remains of the trade. Curved horn bars lay in a collapsed crate furred with mildew. Iron pincers hung open on the wall. A boiling vat rested on bricks, and beside it stood the polishing wheel, taller than Elara's waist, its leather belt hanging slack. She placed both hands on the rim. It shifted and gave a low wooden groan. The sound returned her to Abram's shop, the wheel turning pumice lifting in a pale cloud, his split thumbnail guiding a comb against the moving surface. The memory ended when rain began tapping through the roof into a tin cup. Elara worked until dark. She swept one corner with bundled twigs, carried plaster outside, and spread her coat over 2 feed sacks beneath the bench. Supper was half a heel of bread and water from the hand pump boiled 10 minutes in a dented kettle. It tasted faintly of iron. That night, she lay on the floor with the deed beneath her shirt and listened as the building introduced itself. The north wall creaked when wind came from the river. The chimney whispered loose mortar onto the hearth. Mice traveled behind the boards with careful feet. Each sound had a place, and before sleep took her, Elara began to learn them. Some places do not disappear, they wait. On the first morning, Elara tested the well before she trusted it. She pumped until brown water became clear, filled a glass jar, and held it toward the window. Fine sand settled at the bottom, but no oil floated on the surface, and no sulfur rose from it. She boiled every cup. The outhouse stood 30 paces behind the shop, one hinge intact, its crescent cut out, packed with a sparrow's abandoned nest. By the 3rd day, she knew which floorboard complained near the stove, which one sank beside the back wall, and which creak came not from weight, but from the north wind pressing the bowed timbers. Harnish hardware smelled of machine oil seed sacks, and coffee kept too long on a hot plate. Its owner, Gideon Harnish, had a white mustache trimmed square beneath his nose and a left hand missing the tip of the smallest finger. He listened without interrupting, while Elara explained the chimney, the roof leak, and the money she did not have. "You own the old Wren place," he said. "The county calls it Parcel 47. That is not what people called it." He opened a ledger with marbled covers and wrote her name on a fresh line. 30-day account. No interest if you settle by spring. I cannot promise spring, then promise you will come tell me. He added a thin book to the counter. The cover read, Practical Repairs for Rural Houses, 1948 edition. This one is free, he said. The mice already ate Chapter 9. Elara bought a chimney brush for $4.80, 50 feet of sash cord for $1.40 a pound, of cut nails for 95 cents, lamp oil for 32 cents, and 2 pounds of stove coal for 18 cents. Gideon wrote each price carefully. Beside the total, he drew no line. She spent the afternoon studying the chimney chapter, then climbed to the roof before daylight the next morning. The missing top course had allowed leaves, twigs, and one dead starling to settle above the smoke shelf. She tied the round steel brush to the sash cord, lowered it through the flue, and worked it up and down in short strokes while standing with both boots braced against the ridge. Creosote came loose in black scales, some thin as onion skin, others thick enough to break like burned glass. Twice the brush lodged where the flue narrowed. Each time she lowered a stone tied beneath it, using the added weight to pull the bristles straight. After 4 hours, soot had entered her sleeves and collected in the corners of her eyes. She returned inside, opened the clean-out door, and removed 3 buckets of debris with a bent kitchen spoon. Then she held a candle beneath the throat. The flame leaned upward, steady and blue at the base. Her first fire began with dry walnut twigs, 2 curls shaved from a broken crate, and 3 pieces of coal no larger than eggs. Smoke rolled once into the room, then turned and climbed. Elara watched until the stove began ticking with heat. She set her dented kettle on top and added water, half an onion Gideon had placed in her bag, and a handful of oats. The meal thickened slowly. She ate it from the kettle with the same spoon she had used at the clean-out door after scrubbing the metal with ash and boiling water. Warmth entered the room unevenly but honestly. For the first time since York, she slept without keeping her shoes on. The workroom waited another day. Elara began at the doorway and moved clockwise, touching nothing until she had seen where everything rested. A horn-splitting knife with a curved spine lay beneath the bench. 2 iron flattening pincers leaned against the boiling vat, their wooden grips scorched dark. A tooth-cutting vise remained bolted to the rear edge of the table. On a shelf stood a stone jar of pumice powder, hardened at the top but dry beneath. A set of brass templates hung from a nail, each shaped for a different combback. Near the wall, she found a hand drill, a bundle of willow pegs, and a narrow saw whose teeth were finer than sewing needles. The polishing wheel occupied the center of the room. Its frame was black walnut pegged rather than nailed, and its wheel had been faced with layered leather. Mold marked the lower half, but the upper rim still held a faint sheen from years of pumice and horn dust. Elara turned it by hand. The axle complained once, then revolved with a deeper sound than she expected. She stopped. The hollow note came only when one spoke past the floor. Elara tapped the wheel rim with the handle of the horn knife. The leather answered dully. She tapped the frame. Solid. Then the wooden axle. Near its left end, the sound was close and dense. Near the right, it opened into a low-chambered knock. She removed the drive belt and lifted the wheel a fraction from its bearings. The right side was heavier. Abram had taught her to weigh horn blanks by balancing them across 2 fingers. She used the same method with the axle, sliding a length of board beneath it and finding the point where the wood tipped. The center of weight sat almost 3 inches too far toward the right bearing. Dust filled the shallow grooves around the axle cap. Elara cleaned them with a sewing needle from her satchel and uncovered a circle no wider than a silver dollar. It was not part of the axle. It was a cedar disc fitted so precisely that years of grime had hidden the seam. At its center rested a wooden pin. She did not pry it. Instead, she warmed the room for an hour, allowing the walnut frame to dry and contract away from the softer cedar. Then she brushed lamp oil around the pin with a feather and waited another 20 minutes. Using the smallest iron pincer, she gripped the exposed end, twisted once to the left, once to the right, and pulled. The pin came free with a soft wooden sigh. The cedar disc remained tight. Elias threaded a screw from the broken window latch into its center-wrapped cord around the screw head and drew back evenly with both hands. The disc moved less than the width of a fingernail. A smell escaped from the axle, dry and resinous, untouched by mildew. She worked for another half hour. Behind the disc lay a narrow cavity running through the wooden shaft. The first bundle was wrapped in waxed linen and tied with faded blue thread. The second was longer, protected by oiled leather. A square tin box had been pushed farthest inside, beyond reach of her fingers. Elias made a hook from copper wire and drew each object out without scraping the wood. She opened the long package first. Inside lay 3 tools. Abram's fine-toothed comb saw its walnut handle marked by his thumb, a narrow steel scraper with his initials stamped near the tang, and a polishing burnisher made from a smooth piece of deer bone. Elias set them on a folded flour sack. The linen bundle held raw horn plates already boiled, split, and pressed flat. Between them rested a finished comb 6 inches long, marbled amber and brown to resemble tortoiseshell. Its teeth were exact. Along the spine, in lettering small enough to require window light, someone had carved, "Beauty is not in the material, but in the hands." Elias placed the comb beside Abram's saw. Only then did she open the tin box. A folded letter lay on top. Beneath it were paper packets bound with cotton tape, each marked by year. Elias left the letter closed and lifted the packets one by one. Currency came first, old $10 and $20 notes, flattened and dry, some printed with designs no longer used. Coins filled the bottom in stitched cloth rolls. She counted at the workbench. There were Morgan silver dollars, Walking Liberty half-dollars, Indian head cents, and a smaller group of gold half-eagles wrapped separately in soft paper. One roll contained no money at all, but a tarnished purple heart, engraved on the reverse, with the name Elias Wren and the year 1944. Elias counted once, then again, writing every subtotal in the margin of the repair manual. The notes came to $23,600. The silver and gold, valued only by the amount stamped upon them, added $8,500. $32,100 exactly. The sum did not feel like wealth inside that cold room. It felt like responsibility given weight. She returned every coin to its wrapper, laid the metal above them, and placed the unopened letter on top. The comb remained outside. She carried it to the window and watched its dark pattern brighten when the late sun passed through the horn. At dusk, she locked the tin box beneath the loose hearthstone and walked beyond the outhouse toward the river. The temperature had fallen, and water moved black between the banks, carrying reflected branches downstream. She stood there until the shop windows became 2 dim squares behind her. She could not read the letter yet. Not while the tools still looked as though Abram might return for them. Not while the money lay counted in her own handwriting. Some truths required a night of silence before they could be received. Some places do not disappear, they wait. Morning came pale through the greened window. Elias lifted the tin box from beneath the hearthstone, set it on the workbench, and unfolded the letter without disturbing its creases. The handwriting leaned slightly forward, each capital made with a careful lower loop. She knew it before she reached the first full sentence. Abram had written her birthday cards in the same hand. "My dear one, whoever you are, if you are reading this, then the wheel has stopped long enough for someone patient to hear that its axle is hollow. My name is Abram Thomas Wren. I am writing in Lancaster on March 18, 1991, after Dr. Samuel Breck at St. Joseph Hospital told me the weakness in my hands comes from amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. He said there will be less time than I had counted on. A craftsman should know the measure before he begins. The shop belonged first to Ephraim Wren, born in Littitz in 1814, who learned hornwork from a German comb maker near Philadelphia and opened these doors in 1842. His daughter Clara Wren carried the trade after him, beginning in 1871 when few men would admit that her teeth were cut straighter than theirs. Clara taught her son Josiah, who moved between Lancaster and York from 1896 until 1922. Josiah taught my father Elias Wren, and Elias taught me at this bench before he went to France in the First World War, and again before my brother Samuel left for Europe in 1943. Samuel did not return. The Purple Heart in this box is his. The trade closed here on October 12, 1958. That was the last day an order was finished beneath this roof. Since then, more than 30 years of silence have gathered in the rooms. I tried to purchase the place, but paper can outlast a man's strength. So I kept the tools where the county would not find them and saved what money I could from repairs, farm sales, and small commissions. If you mean to work horn, begin with patience. Simmer cattle horn at 180 degrees, never a rolling boil, for 40 minutes, to soften the fibers without clouding them. Press it between warmed iron plates for 12 minutes, then leave it clamped until fully cold. Mix pumice with 1 part linseed oil to 3 parts water for the first polish. Cut comb teeth only after the plate has rested overnight, and clean the saw every 6 strokes. The work punishes haste before it rewards skill. The money is not payment for being a wren. Blood alone has never made an honest craftsperson. It is there so the roof may be kept, the chimney made safe, and the tools returned to use. Spend slowly, repair before replacing. Learn the grain of every material before asking it to bend. Inheritance is not what one receives without effort. It is the work left unfinished by careful hands offered to another pair that may choose to continue. There is a stone marker beyond the back door near the river path. Beneath it lies the first lamp used in this shop. Light it once, not for me, but for all those whose names were worn away by work. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Abram Thomas Wren, March 8, 1991. Elara read the letter twice. The second time she moved her finger beneath each line, as she had done with school books beside her father. Then she folded the pages along the original creases, pressing them flat with the bone burnisher. No tears fell onto the paper. She would not make the letter carry anything more. Behind the shop, the ground descended toward the river beneath dead grass and walnut leaves. Elara followed the path Abram had named until her boot struck a flat piece of slate half buried beside the roots. She cleared it with both hands. Beneath the slate rested a small iron lamp wrapped in rotted canvas, its handle rusted but whole. She carried it inside and cleaned the reservoir with vinegar salt and a strip torn from the feed sack. The old wick had hardened into a black cord. She replaced it with cotton thread twisted between her palms, added a spoonful of lamp oil, and waited until the fibers darkened. At sunset, she struck one match. The flame rose, unevenly leaned toward the chimney, then steadied beneath the glass. Its light reached the tooth-cutting vise Abram saw and the carved comb. Shadows of the tools stretched across the wall, like hands returning to their stations. Elara did not mistake the lamp for rescue. Rescue had arrived in smaller forms long before she understood it, the church custodian in Elizabethtown leaving the choir room door unlatched, the librarian setting a pencil beside her newspaper without asking questions, the diner cook placing $3 beneath a saucer, Mrs. Klein keeping Abram's index card instead of throwing it away, Gideon Harnish writing her name in his ledger without drawing a line beneath the debt. Perhaps someone once gave you a small kindness that cost them almost nothing and changed the direction of your life. Tell us what it was, and who gave it, if you still remember. Quiet generosity deserves to be carried forward by name. Elara wrapped the metal in clean cloth, laid the comb beside the polishing wheel, and placed the letter beneath her folded coat. That night, she slept on the floor, with Abram's tools arranged beside her in the order they would be used. The first snow arrived on December 2nd, 4 inches laid cleanly over the walnut roots and the broken shingles in the weeds. Elara sat beside the stove and read the roofing chapter 3 times, tracing each diagram with Abram's bone burnisher. The shop roof measured 26 feet by 18 along the slope. Allowing for overlap and waste, she calculated 900 cedar shingles, 2 rolls of felt, and 16 pounds of nails. Gideon Harnish delivered the felt in his truck and set a short roofing hatchet on the workbench. Its head had been polished bright by years of use. "My brother carried that," he said. He died before he could misplace it. An hour later, Warren Pike appeared at the gate. He was 72, narrow through the shoulders, and wore a canvas coat fastened with one brass safety pin. He had roofed barns for 41 years and refused payment before Elara offered it. "Your grandfather sharpened my draw knife," he said. "We are square." They worked 11 days. Warren taught her to brace each weakened rafter with a sister rafter bolted alongside the old timber rather than replacing it. They snapped chalk lines across the felt, beginning at the eaves and rising in exact courses. Each nail went in with 3 strokes, one to set, one to drive, one to seat. On the 4th morning, Warren pointed with his hatchet. "That nail's proud." Elara reached for the hammer. "Pull it." She did. By December 14, the final ridge shingle lay beneath a strip of copper flashing. Elara climbed down after sunset and stood in the road while snowmelt struck the eaves and fell outside the walls. January exposed what the fire had hidden. Bricks near the roofline were spalling their faces, peeling away in thin red sheets, while mortar beneath them powdered at the touch of a finger. Elara removed each loose brick by hand, numbered it in chalk, and carried it inside to dry. She mixed 2 parts hydraulic lime with 1 part sharp sand, adding fire clay at a ratio of 1 cup to every 4 cups of mortar for the inner joints. The mixture had to hold its shape on the trowel without cracking at the edges. Warren inspected the first batch, pressed a thumb into it, and said nothing. That was approval. For 3 weeks, the temperature remained in the 20s. Elara worked barehanded because gloves dulled her sense of the joints. Every 15 minutes, her fingers went numb, and she warmed them against a brick set near the stove before returning outside. She rebuilt the missing courses, repointed the smoke chamber, and fitted a limestone cap with a shallow pitch to shed rain. On January 29th, she lit a test fire with dry oak and a twist of newspaper. Smoke rose through the repaired throat, past the cleanout, without leaking, and drew clean above the roof. Warren watched from the yard until the plume thinned into the winter sky. "That will do," he said. The floor beneath the grime was white pine broad planks, secured with hand-cut rose-head nails. Elara drove each proud nail below the surface with a narrow punch, then rented a random orbit sander from Gideon for $14 per day. She made 3 passes. 80 grit lifted soot, old varnish, and the dark tracks of boots. 120 softened the scratches. 220 left the grain smooth without making it lifeless. Dust settled inside her sleeves and turned the washwater brown. She brushed on the first coat of boiled linseed oil with a rag wrapped around a block of pine. The second coat followed after 12 hours, the third the next morning. Then she barred the door and allowed 48 hours for the finish to cure. The boards changed beneath the oil. What had appeared dark honey deepened toward mahogany, where feet had crossed the room for generations. The worn path between the workbench and polishing wheel remained visible not as damage but as record. One morning, Ilara carried the sander to the front room and could not switch it on. The sound of the river was too loud, and her hands would not settle. She walked to the marsh below River Road instead. A great blue heron stood among the reeds, motionless, except for the wind lifting the feathers at its neck. Ilara watched it until afternoon and did no work that day. The next morning she returned. The sander paid Gideon $28 from one old $10 note, and the coins she had earned washing cafe dishes and finished the floor by hand along the walls. There were 8 windows in the shop. 3 had no glass at all. 4 were cracked from corner to corner. The last held a single original pane from 1788, thin and wavering, with small bubbles suspended inside it. Ilara preserved that pane and rebuilt the sash around it. For the others, she cut replacement glass, 1/8 inch short on every side, set each pane on glazing points, and rolled Day P33 putty between her palms until it warmed. She pressed the putty into the rabbet with her thumb, then drew the knife along the edge in one deliberate stroke, leaving a bevel that would shed water. The counterweights remained inside the walls, though 2 had fallen from their cords. Ilara threaded 1/4 inch cotton sash cord over the pulleys, lowered it through the weight pockets, and tied each iron weight with a figure 8 knot. When the windows rose without binding, she rubbed the channels with beeswax. She saved the oldest pane for last. Late on February 26th, she seated it beneath the east lintel. Outside, a chickadee landed on a walnut branch close enough for her to see the pale line above its eye. It tilted its head as Ilara smoothed the final run of putty. The bird remained until she lowered the sash, and the old glass held the evening light without trembling. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Ilara completed the first object made entirely beneath the restored roof. It was a 6-inch dressing comb cut from a pale cattle horn plate she had softened at 180 degrees, pressed flat between Abram's iron jaws, and allowed to cool overnight. She marked the teeth with a brass template, cleaned the fine saw after every 6th stroke, and rejected the piece when one tooth leaned. The second attempt took 4 days. For the final polish, she mixed pumice, linseed oil, and water in the proportions Abram had written. The cloudy surface deepened slowly into amber and brown. When she held the finished comb before the window, winter light passed through it like tea through thin porcelain. She carved no price beneath it, only the year. The shop no longer smelled of wet plaster or mouse nests. White pine floors shone beneath the workbench, and the chimney drew without complaint. 8 repaired windows held the cold outside. Abram's tools rested on wooden pegs, each shadow falling in its proper place. Ilara kept one wall unfinished, its stones exposed, so she would remember the condition in which the building had received her. The brass key remained on the mantel. She had found it months earlier in a small oak box beneath the cellar steps, beside a 1903 tintype of Clara Wren, holding a horn knife outside the shop. Ilara tried the key in every lock she could see. It fit none of them. On Christmas morning, while clearing dead ivy from the older walnut tree, she noticed a rectangular iron plate set into the trunk where 2 limbs divided. Bark had grown around its edges. At its center was a keyhole shaped almost exactly like the bow of the brass key. The lock resisted until she warmed it with oil between her fingers. Inside the hollow was a narrow copper case wrapped in tarred cloth. It held a folded 48-star American flag and a note dated May 30th, 1918, written by Clara Wren, while Elias served with the American Expeditionary Forces in France. She had written only 1 page. The flag, Clara explained, had hung in the shop window for every local son sent overseas. She asked that it remain folded until a Wren could place it beside the name of someone who had not returned. Beneath her signature, she had added that a family should not preserve war as glory, but should preserve the cost closely enough that no generation mistook loss for romance. Elara carried the flag and Samuel Wren's Purple Heart to Indiantown Gap National Cemetery on November 11, 2025. At 11 in the morning, she placed the medal beside a memorial marker bearing his name. No official ceremony had been arranged. A groundskeeper paused his cart, removed his cap, and stood with her until the wind folded the small flag against her coat. Of the $32,100 hidden in the wheel, Elara spent only 4 gold coins. 1 paid for roof, timber, 1 for chimney brick, 1 for glass and plaster, and 1 for horn stock purchased from a Pennsylvania cattle farmer who kept careful records. The paper currency and remaining coins went back into the tin box. She wrapped them in fresh waxed linen and sealed the axle with a new cedar disc. On the disc, she carved 3 words. For the next one, the shop reopened without announcement. Doris, at the Red Rose Cafe, placed an index card on the corkboard, beside notices for piano lessons and firewood. It read, "Hand-cut horn combs, repairs accepted. Ask Doris for directions." The first customer brought a cracked shoehorn. The second wanted a missing tooth repaired in her grandmother's comb. By spring, more than 40 names filled a mailing list kept in a flour tin. Elara accepted only the work she could finish honestly. No one was promised speed. Caleb returned one Saturday carrying a sign across the handlebars of his Schwinn. He had grown taller, though his coat sleeves had not. The sign was carved from walnut, taken from a storm-fallen limb. Across its face he had cut Wren Horn Works in deep, careful letters. Beneath the name, in a smaller line, he had added, "and daughters." Elara ran her thumb over the fresh carving. "There were daughters before me," she said. Caleb shrugged, embarrassed by praise. Then it was overdue. They hung the sign above the door, using hand-forged hooks found in the cellar. It did not erase the old gray board with its 3 remaining letters. Elara mounted that one inside over the polishing wheel. That evening, she sat at Abram's bench, with a sheet of cream paper, the first completed comb, beside her, and began a letter for whoever might one day remove the cedar disc. "My dear one, whoever you are," she wrote about the roof and the river, the days her hands had failed, and the people who had given help without turning it into a debt. She recorded the temperatures, timings, and mistakes that had cost good material. She explained that the money belonged to the work, not to the person who found it. Then she added a sentence of her own. "Do not continue merely because we did. Continue only if the work makes you more patient with what cannot be hurried." She folded the page but did not seal it. There would be more years to add. Some places do not disappear, they wait. Outside snow began along River Road, settling on the walnut branches and the new sign. Elara lowered the wick in the old iron lamp, closed the repaired sash, and left Abram's unfinished comb beside the one she had made. The hornsmith's shop waits. It has always waited. At the county clerk's office, Mrs. Klein had retired, but the brass stamp remained in use. In the back of her old desk, beneath Abram's faded index card, lay one of the $3 bills Elara had placed on the counter that first morning. Mrs. Klein had never sent it to the treasury. Across its margin, in small blue handwriting, she had written, "Paid in full."
The Heroic Veteran Dogs is a fictional channel created to entertain, educate, and inspire the audience by exploring the deep, loyal bond between veterans and their dogs. All channel content does not represent real individuals, actual events, or documented cases. Any resemblance to real people, animals, or events is entirely coincidental.